Well, we are in the depths of summer here. 91/66 in our area, deep in that tropical moisture. We do have the dry line out to the west. It's not very well defined, but it is present, and that extends from South Dakota all the way through Kansas down to Texas. We've got an active polar frontal system there in the western U.S., a couple of baroclinic lows from Wyoming down to Nevada. And it looks like that front that has crossed Mojave, Edwards Air Force Base, Los Angeles in that area, it looks like that has dissipated, or is in the process of dissipating. It looks like there's very rapid erosion due to the strong heating there in the southwest deserts. And there's just not a whole lot of push behind that front. In fact, let's go to a cross-section and let's use tropical tidbits to build a cross-section down the San Joaquin Valley down to, let's say, south of Ajo, Arizona. Maybe, yeah, kind of like that. That should hit us in the desert right there. So let's check that out. And there we go. You can see just a very limited slope on that. Typically, we want to see like strong packing of those isotropes and kind of a vertical component, but we're not quite seeing that. And yeah, there is strong jet support right there. And if we use our basic rules of thumb, trough there, ridge there, trough, you're always going to have a trough in between the ridges. So it's going to go about like that. Probably another trough here, maybe a very flat ridge. This would all indicate maybe a frontal system kind of in that area. Low pressure center right there. Low pressure center maybe in here. And this would be indicated to be kind of a high pressure area. So it is kind of indeterminate in this area and not much support for a surface front in that region. That should be a frontalysis area. But that air mass entering the southwest deserts, it's getting a beat down from all that intense heating. That's eroding the front and tremendously modifying the air mass. So it's not going to make much headway either into eastern California. But, you know, we have to watch upstream and see if there is anything associated with this shortwave right there. Okay, likewise, yeah, there's support for a baroclinic system there in Manitoba, kind of like that. And we would look for our frontalysis right there over Saskatchewan. Now, it's not going to match that exactly, but we're going to be kind of looking in that area for this kind of process taking place. And obviously with a subtropical ridge from Texas to the Great Lakes, that's going to keep that area warm and dry. In fact, we can just bring up a skew-t right in the middle of that subtropical ridge, and yeah, look at all that warm air. And I call that warm air because the lapse rate is not that impressive. It's not like the red line is not leaning way over like that. Now, this isn't like a whole lot of warm air, but, you know, at least it's something. And our rising parcels don't really capture a whole lot of CAPE in the middle of that, even with that good low 60s moisture. And down closer to Oklahoma, yeah, a lot more warm air aloft, and even some dry conditions. All right, let's take a look at the satellite imagery that paints quite a picture. For one thing, we can see a distinct transition between that stratocumulus field and the stuff up to the north. And this is probably associated with cold air advection coming down along the coast, probably behind that cold front. So maybe there is still a little bit of push to that. We see that the southwest deserts and the San Joaquin Valley are clear. That would be kind of an indicator that what has come on shore is pretty heavily modified. But up to the north, kind of a different picture. Lots of towering cumulus and cumulonimbus. And if we look at those elements, notice how they're not really sticking to the mountain ranges. They're just kind of moving from southwest to northeast following the deep mid-tropospheric flow. So this tells you that a lot of it is kind of embedded in the strong flow aloft. And this is probably back in the cold air mass, back north of the front. So I would expect to find the front kind of in that area right there. It's a little less apparent down in this area because of the dry air and subsidence. Up to the north, that brings us closer to the deep occlusion. If we refer back to the GFS, you can see that we've got an upper level low right there, east of Portland. That's north of the polar front jet, so that's going to be an occlusion. And by looking at the higher level cloud, we can see that circulation kind of corresponding to that region there. So this is all going to be cold core convection, very warm down at the surface, very cold aloft. And if we look at our forecast skew-ts, put it right in the center of that low. Yeah, look at that very low tropopause there, down at 27,000 feet. Also, moist adiabatic lapse rate, lots of humidity, and some moderate instability there. And looks like a very showery day there over Idaho and Oregon. Looking at the north central U.S., it looks like mostly this is under the influence of high pressure. We've got southerly flow right there working up the Great Plains. So it looks like maybe high pressure over the Great Lakes. And pretty clear evidence of low pressure along the Rockies. In the southern U.S., we know that that's dominated by that big subtropical ridge, but it's not quite strong enough to shut down the thunderstorms. We've got them breaking out in places like Shawnee, Oklahoma, Durant, Bonham, Texas, all the way down to Tyler. And taking a look at those anvil clouds, we can see that they're being lofted west to east. So we're not in that deep easterly flow like we see in late summer. This is still under the prevailing westerlies. So that difference in the wind between the surface and the top of the troposphere, that's given us some modest shears. And if we look at the GFS, we do a quick forecast sounding. This is for East Texas, and you can see the easterly flow in the top part of the troposphere, but not much going on in the low levels. So what we're getting here is the anvils being carried to the east and the storms propagating to the west. The southeast U.S., very similar to yesterday. We've got a baroclinic system off the coast there, starting to get some dry air advection into Florida and off the coast, so that's shutting down convection through that area. But the wraparound, we've got isentropic lift working on the area, lots of overcast, and so this is mostly influenced by dynamics. And there you can see a lot of embedded activity around the Morehead City area, some pretty good anvils there. And looks like the surface front we saw yesterday in this area, that's probably kind of become stationary right there. There's NHC. They've had their eye on this storm, and you can see they're not expecting that to become a tropical cyclone. They refer to it as a non-tropical low-pressure area, and they're looking for probably the shear to keep that from intensifying into a tropical storm there. And then the northeast U.S. looks like a quiet day. And you can see the summer lake effect there. See that little outflow boundary right there? That's kind of the sea breeze there moving inland. And that's helping to stabilize things over Cleveland, Erie, and Toledo. Very prominent example. And of course, that's the opposite of what we see in the wintertime, where you've got towering cumulus and extensive cloud cover coming on shore and dumping rain and snow. Yeah, one interesting thing from the surface chart that I noticed, we'll take that up to the north there and look at Canada. Look at some of those temperatures there around Hudson Bay. It's 84 at Winnisk. Yeah, is that Winnisk? Yeah, it definitely is. And then Fort Severn, I think that's a Hudson Bay Trading Company outpost there. Yeah, a little cooler at Fort Severn, 70 degrees. And that's some really hot air for this time of year. 86 along the coast there. And they really don't have air conditioning in those First Nation villages. So I think they're probably suffering to some extent from that heat. And some of the dew points in Western Ontario, 63 to 66. So that's definitely some tropical air in place in that region. All right, let us look at those convective outlooks. Yeah, this is like every day in the summertime. Just park yourself near Aberdeen or Bismarck and you've got action. Yeah, so that's another sign we have advanced into summer and pretty much skipped spring on the Great Plains. We've definitely had our cold weather, that's been nice, but if you're looking for severe weather outbreaks, we have just not had it. We haven't even had a high-risk day to do a special weathercast with. So I guess that's just par for the course. 2020. And the summer solstice. The Great Google tells us that's going to be on Saturday, June 20th. That's coming up in a few days here at 4:43 p.m. Central. And that's when the sun will be at its highest in the sky and will have the maximum solar heating in the northern hemisphere. So what changes can we expect over the next week? Well, starting out, we're obviously in a long-wave ridge pattern in the central U.S. with troughs along the coasts. And going forward over the next few days, you can see the strong jet stream coming into the Great Basin area. As expected this time of year, that's going to rotate up into the North Dakota region. You can see the pattern starts off as this Rex block here with a high north of a low. However, moving forward through time, this high actually absorbs into this ridge off the coast, and that kind of kicks the trough eastward. So, yeah, certainly some storms for the Dakotas over the next few days. However, in the eastern U.S., we're still hanging on to that stubborn low, so continued poor weather there in the Carolinas. And going into the weekend, well, the weekend's almost here. We do get a little bit of a trough coming into the southern plains, so maybe the flow increasing towards the weekend there in Kansas and maybe boosting some of that activity along the dry line. Going into the weekend proper, that trough ejects to the northeast over Nebraska and Iowa for Saturday, and then that should be out of the picture for the U.S. by Sunday. Upper level flow becomes kind of flat. Not really much going on except some troughing there in the Great Lakes. It looks like we have some subtropical ridging building in over California, so it's probably going to get hot once again in that region early next week. Also, we can see overall some ridging on the west coast there. This is all kind of a big long wave ridge with some troughing there in the Great Lakes region. So that's going to put a lot of the area in between through here under kind of a quiet weather pattern. But showing up to the party is this digging jet. So you can see that kind of diving southward. Here comes another jet kind of developing over Montana around Wednesday or Thursday next week, and that digs down into the plains, and we should see an increase in thunderstorm activity around midweek in Kansas and Nebraska and Missouri. That trough there is probably a reflection of some cold air on its way down, probably a big cool air mass that may drive as far south as the Red River there late next week. Then we resolve that with the surface patterns. It's kind of a mess, so we're going to zoom in. And there we go. Yeah, we kind of combine that with the upper air data, what we saw earlier. And we can see, yeah, it's kind of baroclinic there in the northern plains and the Rockies. Going into the weekend, you can see the effects of that increasing flow there. Thunderstorms going up in western Oklahoma. You can see how active it is right there, anywhere from Colorado Springs down to Amarillo. So a little bit of convection in that region. Then things move up to the Great Lakes, and then we see the Central Plains become active, little MCS there around Monday night, and more thunderstorm activity. You see that right there, kind of a succession of building convection there in the Kansas and Oklahoma area. And it looks like with that northwesterly flow, that'll probably drive some of that down into Texas as the week goes on. Outflow has a tendency to propagate south with the quiet flow this time of year, and that tends to bring the thunderstorms southward with each day. Things quiet down for the last week of June, and then towards the very end, that ridging kind of shutting things down in Texas. Okay, that's about all I got for tonight. Thank you for watching. Here's a little video from a storm that passed by this evening. Anyway, we'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great evening.